Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and if you're watching today's video on the day that it releases, then today is day 1 of the Latin American International Championships for Pokemon Go. This is the official tournament that is using the 2025 Championship Series Cup rule set. So, in honor of this being day 1 of the tournament, today let's talk about a Pokemon that is not only amazing in the Go Battle League version of this meta, but also has a good chance of winning the entire tournament. That is Medicham. Medicham previously was a top meta threat many years back with Counter, but in this meta, it actually runs Psycho Cut. It can outbulk just about everything and is terrifying in neutral matchups. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we're off to a pretty tough start, leading Ember Turtonator into Dugong. I don't have a great response to a Dugong lead, so I end up safe switching into Gyarados. Gyarados' Crunch lands and does get the 20% chance at a defense drop. My opponent will return fire with the Icy Wind, but because of that defense drop, I'm still outputting some pretty nice damage. My goal here is to try and soft lose to zeros and go for a big farm on Turtonator. Crunch lands, we get another debuff. The second Crunch debuff is actually bad for me, because this means I'm going to get less farm. I was wanting to soft lose it and get huge farm with Turtonator, but I only get 3 Embers when I could have got quite a lot more. My opponent is now going to be sending out Shadow Gyarados. I build up past the Dragon Claw, and I will bait with the Brutal Swing. But my opponent does not respect it. That's a little bit unfortunate. I know that I survive any one charge stack, so I'm going to be no shielding as they go for the Aqua Tail. Now I can immediately undertap this Brutal Swing. Brutal Swing will be getting my opponent very low. They will put up the shield, and now out comes Medicham. Medicham up a shield is a very, very scary Pokemon. Medicham just has bulk that almost nothing else in this meta has. I'm going to immediately undertap the Ice Punch and look to try and pressure a shield. The shield does come up from the Shadow Gyarados. I really don't want to go for a CMP tie, but my opponent will throw right before I'm able to get there. Aqua Tail will be shielded. In the back, they have a Rangaroo, and look at this. Medicham is about to absolutely feast. Medicham gets the Launch Dynamic Punch. That's going to land for big damage, and I'm not in range of any charge attack from a Rangaroo taking the knockout. So they will fire off the Trailblaze. That's going to get me low, but even this boosted Confusion will not be enough to KO. Second Dynamic Punch is going to land, putting them deep into the red. I bank the Ice Punch, switch into Turtonator to force my opponent to throw energy, and now I should be able to Psycho Cut down. There's the switch into the Shadow Gyarados, but Medicham is just too bulky. We make the Ice Punch, knocking out the Gyarados, Psycho Cut down that Rangaroo, and that is a good game. We move to the next match, and unfortunately, it's the exact same lead as last game, Turtonator into Dugong. So far, we're getting very negative leads, and honestly, when putting this team together, I didn't really consider what it could be ABA Week 2. I think this meta is so good in terms of you can kind of just run strong Pokemon and then neutrally outplay, so I didn't really think about the order that the mons would be in and potential Pokemon that I would be ABA Week 2. My opponent ends up banking energy on the Dugong, and out comes Medicham. I'm forced to throw a debuffed Aqua Tail just to burn the switch timer, and now I get to bring in my own Medi. Medicham is a very effective Pokemon at dealing with energy from an opposing Medicham. They're going to go for the Ice Punch, and I think that I can Psycho Cut it into double Dynamic range, so I'm actually going to be firing off the Dynamic Punch. Dynamic Punch is resisted, but it will do slightly more damage, and both charge attacks have the exact same damage per energy in the mirror. So Dynamic Punch is going to land, in comes a Rangaroo, and I throw 2 in the move to take advantage of the fact that my opponent is guaranteed to get 1 turn swap there. Now, I can rebank the charge attack and pivot into the Turtonator, and I am in an incredibly advantageous position. I have a ton of energy on the Gyarados, I have a ton of energy on the Medicham, and I'm in a very favorable matchup, Turtonator into a Rangaroo. I don't want to throw just yet, because I want to try and get a ton of residual energy. I do have to be mindful that the switch timers are misaligned, so I will go for the Brutal Swing here, and Brutal Swing will be taking the knockout. Back in comes Medicham, but I absolutely have to keep this energy. So I put up the shield, there's the switch into the Dugong. I know they're 1 away from the Icy Wind, so I immediately go for the Dragon Claw. Dragon Claw is going to land. My opponent gets himself as low as possible before taking the knockout. Icy Wind is going to KO the Turtonator, and I'm going for farm on Medicham. All my opponent has left is their own Medicham, and there's just too many banked charge attacks. Medicham has 2 charge attacks banked. I can fire off the Ice Punches back to back. I know Gyarados has a bunch of energy as well. I think I have the Crunch banked, and I do. Maybe an Aqua Tail would have knocked out, but Crunch will absolutely guarantee it. Crunch lands, down goes Medicham. We've seen 2 bad leads, and we've ended up winning both of them. Picking up a pretty neutral lead in the next match, Ember Turtonator into Dusknoir. Now, the reason why I say neutral is I believe Dusknoir can actually win the 2. So Dusknoir does have shielding scenarios in neutrals where it can emerge victorious. That's because Ember has incredibly fast energy generation, but it doesn't have a lot of fast move pressure, so I'm never going to be able to farm down my opponent. Dusknoir farming up a ton of energy, and they're going to have to start shielding if they want this energy to go somewhere. They do just that, the perfect overfarm from my opponent, and I decide that I'm just going to let the Turtonator go and go for farm on Gyarados. I absolutely love Gyarados. My opponent ends up pivoting into Turtonator, and my guess is this was probably a misclick from my opponent, as this is just an incredibly favorable matchup for the Gyarados. Gyarados is just going to continue to farm up a ton of energy, and here I do make a misplay. I should have gone for the Crunch. I think if I go for the Crunch, I can actually Dragon Breath down, but because I went for the Aqua Tail, I just missed the knockout, and I'm forced to go for the Cap Tie. So that is a definite misplay on my part. My opponent is going to Cap Tie, so they clearly want to get some damage on the Gyarados or Shields down, and I go Shields down. In the back, oh no, it's Dugong! And poor Dugong is about to get absolutely crushed. I overfarm to bank a move on Gyarados, but make sure that I switch fast enough that I'll be able to get to the double Dynamic Punch before they can get their second Icy Wind. This means that I'll be able to exit this matchup with a ton of residual HP, which is very valuable because I'm going to have to take some Astonishes here in the near future. Dynamic Punch number 2 will KO the Dugong. In comes Dusknoir. I'm just going to switch to reset the debuff. It's a simultaneous switch as they went for the catch, but Gyarados will win Charge Attack priority over Dusknoir. So Crunch is going to land, knocking out the Dusknoir and securing the win. Hopping into the next match, and we've got our first truly great lead of the video, Turtonator into Oranguru. This is such a dominant matchup for Ember Turtonator. Turtonator can almost always exit this matchup with a full charge attack loaded, which is incredibly nice, as it guarantees you're going to get some kind of advantage, whether it's chip or a shield advantage, into their backline. Oranguru will spam out Brutal Swings, but Turtonator just simply does not mind. Turtonator going for a Brutal Swing of its own, and that gets Oranguru deep into the red. Oranguru going to be firing off another Brutal Swing. I could potentially decide to get aggressive here, and that's what I'm going to do. I pivot into Gyarados, snipe them down with Dragon Breaths, and that's one of the things that I do really like about this meta, is switch advantage so does not matter. It's all about playing aggressive, not conceding farm downs, getting an energy advantage, because almost every matchup in this meta is flippable with a shield or energy advantage. This isn't like the Open Great League where you can put a Bastiodon on an Altaria and just auto-win the game. It all comes down to how you play the game rather than the alignment that you get. My opponent has a Shadow Matang in the back. I could commit to the Crunch, but it's actually substantially more valuable to go for the Aqua Tail and then pivot into the Medicham. The reason being is either I get some pretty solid damage or I get the shield, but I just don't want to give them a massive energy head start going into the Medi matchup. My opponent is going to go for the Cap Tie, Psyshock to Dynamic Punch, and look at the Dynamic Punch. The speed on Medicham, being able to spam out such an efficient charge attack every 10 turns, and for Ice Punch is 5-4, so it's even faster. I do have energy banked on the Turtonator as well, so after Dynamic Punch gets the shield, there's the combo play with the Turtonator, and we get to fire off the Brutal Swing. This team's pacing is just incredibly fast, and that's one of the reasons why it was such an incredibly fun team to run. Unfortunately, we run into our third Dugong lead, so the weaknesses of the team definitely being exposed, as the lack of thought that I put into what I could be ABA weak to is definitely coming back to bite me a little bit. Dugong, I'm going to be safe switching Gyarados always. This time, no Crunch debuffs to bail me out. Immediate no shield as they will go for the Icy Wind, and I'm again going to be firing off another Crunch. This will not knock out, but if my opponent tries to farm down, I do get an Aqua Tail because I have a very good Gyarados. This time I do get a Crunch debuff, but it's on the second one. And this is actually pretty nice, because I think this is going to set up a sick Ember farm down. In comes Turtonator. Look at the farm. Turtonator. Oh my goodness. And now out comes Gyarados. This is the non-Shadow Gyarados. I'm full sending the Dragon Claw, and Gyarados puts up the shield. I'm not in range where a charge attack will knock me out, and that's why my opponent doesn't throw. If Gyarados ever throws a charge attack at the Turtonator before Turtonator is in knockout range, I'm just never going to shield, so my opponent realizes this and they're going to hold on to their energy. I send in Medicham in the back, they have their own Ember Turtonator, and Dynamic Punch is going to inflict very big damage. Ember Turtonator I think is better in basically every other situation, but it does make the Medicham matchup quite a bit worse, as Medicham is just so incredibly bulky. Medicham's Dynamic Punch is going to land, taking the knockout, and back in comes Gyarados. Immediate no shield from the Medicham. I should be outside of 2 Aqua Tail range, although the Dragon Breath Grass may potentially put me in the knockout range. I'm now going to fire off this Ice Punch. I know that I do have some residual energy on my Turtonator as well. Medicham continuing to farm up. Tough call to make. Are they going to go for the crunch? I shield. It's going to be the Aqua Tail. They fire off energy. Is this the Aqua Tail? I should survive an Aqua Tail here, but no, it's the crunch. And the Dragon Breath after takes the knockout. Back in comes Turtonator, but the Ember pacing saves us. Only 6 turns away, outpacing the Gyarados, taking the knockout, and winning a wild game. We've got a great opponent in the next match, and it's rise to occasion. Unfortunately, it's our 4th Dugong lead. We cannot escape the Dugongs. We're undefeated so far versus the Dugongs, but it's definitely been an uphill battle. Crunch is going to be shielded, and that is a problem. All the other Dugongs ended up playing the Zeros, which is honestly really fine for Gyarados. This Dugong decided to shield. That's going to make life very, very tricky for me. I will fire off a Crunch, and I can get an Aqua Tail when my opponent tries to farm me down, but Aqua Tail just doesn't do a lot of damage, and my opponent's going to exit this matchup with a ton of loaded energy. I'll be able to send in Medicham to absorb the energy, so my hope is that I can just tank 2 Icy Winds, then Turtonator up a shield will be able to win. Icy Wind is going to land. My opponent is going to farm up. They send in their own Medicham, and I'm debuffed. I can't afford to throw the energy. I just bank it and send in the Turtonator, but at this point, I've already lost this game. Dugong lead is very, very difficult for this team. I've beaten it every time so far, but Rise's decision to shield the Dugong and then save the Dugong and pivot in the Medi has unfortunately made a difficult matchup impossible, as I just don't see a way for me to win this whatsoever. Dragon Claw is going to land. Medicham able to withstand that damage very comfortably. I don't know if he ended up turn waiting there or if it was just the Brazilian Wi-Fi that was not great, but he can just combo here. And I believe I end up going for a bit of a BM Ice Punch into the Dugong before I top left. So I fire off the Ice Punch, knowing there's no way for me to win this game, and we are going to concede that match. We get a great lead in the next match, Turtonator into Metang. My opponent safe switches into Runerigus, and Runerigus is a Pokemon that this team is a little bit soft to as well if it's not aligned onto the Gyarados. I'm able to get some nice chip damage, putting it in Aqua Tail range, and out comes Gary. Gyarados will have to shield the Rock Tomb. I would survive it, but it would do huge damage. Now I can just massively overfarm. Ideally, I would love to try and pivot out of this matchup if I can, because I hate staying in matchups when I am debuffed. I'm going to look to overfarm quite a bit, throwing right before they're able to get their Psyshock. The question is, will this Crunch burn my switch timer? Can I escape? No, I cannot. That means a Psyshock is going to land onto the Gyarados. I want to preserve the Gyarados, so I'm actually going to go down 2 shields here. My opponent pivots out, and they bring in Oranguru. Oranguru going to take some pretty nice damage from Crunch, and now I can pivot into the Medicham. Medicham is just so good into Oranguru. Oranguru goes for the Trail Blaze looking to boost up their damage, but part of the reason why Medicham was so good back in the day, it was just bulkier than everything else. And we see the bulk on full display as Oranguru is just getting completely torn to smithereens. Oranguru already buffed up its confusions, and its confusions still aren't hitting that hard. Oranguru will finally be able to take the knockout, but they're forced to throw energy because of this insane pacing on Medicham. My opponent, they are pretty boosted, but I have a full health Turtonator, so I can bring in the Turtonator, more than happy to absorb that damage. Brutal Swing is going to land. In comes Metang. I'm going to get the max overfarm with Turtonator. My opponent now very close to a Psyshock, but I can guarantee the win by switching Gyarados. My opponent is forced to throw energy because otherwise Gyarados just farms down, but by throwing energy, they just give farm to the Turtonator. And now Turtonator exits with the charge attack loaded to KO Oranguru and take the win. Medicham is just an absolute force of nature in this meta. Even though I was down 2 shields at one point, Medicham is just so strong when shields are down that it simply did not matter. Moving into the next match, we've got a bit of a tricky lead, leading Turtonator into Runerigus. Now, Runerigus is going to be a problem for this entire team. Runerigus isn't a super common Pokemon, but it is still definitely played. Runerigus can hit for big super effective damage with Rock Tomb. I don't really want to stay in this matchup debuff, so I'm going to safe switch to Gyarados. My opponent responds with, what is this? And a Alolan Raichu. Alolan Raichu can't even farm down a Gyarados without having to give up a shield. So I make the crunch, they're forced to shield. An electric type being forced to shield when farming down a Gyarados. I'm not a big believer in Alolan Raichu. Psyshock will do some pretty solid damage. I can't let them get to a second Psyshock, so I will fire off this Brutal Swing to take the knockout. My opponent's still going to have that Runerigus, and I just need damage on this Pokemon. The Runerigus does have a little bit of stored energy, but at this point, I have unfortunately lost count. I believe they're at the back-to-back here, and I think I do lose this charge tech priority tie. I still test it, and I do not win it, and that is really not great. So they will be able to take the knockout with the Brutal Swing. In the back, they have a Molga. So I think no matter how I played this, I was probably just losing this game. But this is kind of what I've been talking about throughout this entire meta. I think this meta can devolve into a little bit of RPS if people kind of run more fringe, what I would refer to as bad picks for the meta. But if you run a lot of the staple meta, then it ends up being a very flexible meta where you almost always have play into everything. Hopping into the final match, it's a pretty bad lead, leading Gyarados into Turtonator. I save switch into my own Gyarados, and I'm always going to be behind by a turn. Because I'm behind by a turn, there's high incentive for me to bait. I'm going to farm up to the double Aqua Tail, and I'm not going to bait. I'm full sending, hoping my opponent tries to call the bait, and they do. And just like that, the Gyarados has almost been entirely neutralized. Gyarados goes for the Aqua Tail for some chip and sends out a Rangaroo, but this mid-game has been going on for so long that I should be able to pivot out. I get the shield, and in comes Turtonator. Turtonator is just so viciously strong. Ember, the pacing is unreal, and a Rangaroo, it really can't do much in this matchup. Basically guaranteeing that you can always exit this matchup with a charge stack loaded just puts you so far ahead as the Ember Turtonator player. They're going to go for another Brutal Swing, but Turtonator just simply does not care. 3 Embers, and we're already at the back-to-back Brutal Swings. This Brutal Swing will be able to take the knockout. My opponent should bring in the Gyarados to try and absorb this energy, but I want to save it. I send in the Medicham. In the back is Turtonator, and unfortunately, this is going to be a Medi sweep. Dynamic Punch does get the shield. This is where the bulk of Medicham shines, because even if I do end up no-shielding a Dragon Claw, it just doesn't do that much damage. I decide to shield, though, and I get the shield call right, as my opponent did go for the full send. My opponent's only way back into this game will be some kind of catch. So they should throw right before I get the move, and then I'm just always going to switch into the Gyarados, because this is going to get some nice fast move pressure if they don't catch, and if they try and go for the catch, then I can just farm them down. Back in comes their Turtonator. They cannot get the Ember down. I make it to the Aqua Tail. Aqua Tail takes the knockout, and that is a good game. And as you can see here, this team did take me up to 3260 ELO, which is in the top 100 ranked battlers on the Go Battle League leaderboard. The more I play this meta, the more I honestly fall in love with it. Even though they didn't enforce their shadow ban, I still feel like even with some of those problematic shadows allowed, this is still an extremely fun meta. I did get some comments on the first video of people talking about how they disliked the meta because it's just a Rangaroo, Gyarados, and Turtonator, and I did want to speak on that a little bit. I think that just because a meta lacks diversity, it doesn't mean that it's a bad meta. In this particular situation, I actually think it's what makes this meta strong. And that's because all of the good Pokemon have very flexible play into each other. If you're ever up shields or energy, you're never out of a game. So you can kind of just slap together any 3 of like the 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 good Pokemon in this meta, and then just neutrally outplay people and climb. And it's part of why, especially in my Discord, we're suddenly seeing a bunch of people who have struggled all season have skyrocketing elos. That's because the Open Grade League meta this season, in my eyes, was more alignment dependent than it's been in quite some time. So having a meta where alignment truly doesn't matter, and in a lot of games you can just energy manage your way out of bad situations, I think is an absolute breath of fresh air. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy watching content like this, please do consider leaving a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is genuinely so sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys so very much. And until next time, I'm in HomeSliceHenry.